Everyone thinks Virgo is just the perfectionist, organized, responsible, calm. But that's only the surface. Beneath the poise is a mind that never stops criticizing, a heart that aches from carrying silent burdens, a soul that tries to earn love by fixing everything, including itself. What if the pursuit of perfection is actually a cry for worth? What if Virgo's greatest strength is also its greatest wound? Stay with this video. By the end, you won't just see Virgo differently, you'll understand a hidden part of yourself you've been quietly trying to perfect all along. Virgo doesn't shout, it whispers. It enters the world not with fire, but with quiet precision. The careful gaze, the calculating mind, the subtle sense that something is off and must be corrected. Virgo is the zodiac's alchemist, but its magic isn't loud. It works in details, in silence, in sacred noticing. It doesn't need to dominate, it needs to fix. Not to control the world, but to make it whole. To bring order to what feels broken. To make sense of what feels wrong. But what no one tells you is this: Virgo's obsession with fixing isn't rooted in arrogance, it's rooted in wounding. In the belief, often formed early and reinforced endlessly, that love must be earned, that worth must be proven, that if they are not perfect, they will not be safe. Beneath the poised exterior of Virgo lives a constant hum of anxiety, a whisper that says, "You missed a spot." A voice that never turns off, never stops pointing out what could be better, cleaner, more efficient, more acceptable. And that voice doesn't just speak to the world, it turns inward. Virgo becomes its own harshest critic, its own unforgiving judge. It seeks purity not out of vanity, but out of a deep fear that mess equals failure, that chaos means danger, that being flawed means being rejected. This is the shadow no one sees, because Virgo hides it well. They smile, they show up, they perform with grace, humility, and quiet strength. They help others hold space, hold standards, hold the world together. But what holds them, the Virgo soul, is ancient. It remembers lifetimes of laboring for the good of others, of being the priestess, the healer, the scribe, the humble servant. It was never about glory. It was about duty, about devotion. But when duty becomes identity, the self disappears, and Virgo becomes a ghost in its own life, valued for what it does, rarely seen for what it feels. Even the myth that echoes through Virgo, the goddess Astrea, the last immortal to leave Earth during the fall of the Golden Age, speaks of disappointment, of seeing the world's decline and withdrawing disillusioned. Virgo carries that grief, still the sorrow of loving something so deeply and never being able to perfect it. The dark side of Virgo is not cruelty, it's depletion, it's self-neglect, it's the endless loop of doing, without receiving, of striving, without resting, of giving, without knowing how to ask. It is the belief that if they just do enough for others, for the world, for themselves, maybe then they will be allowed to rest. Maybe then they will be loved. But perfection never arrives. The list never ends. The bar keeps rising. And Virgo, the sacred servant, becomes a prisoner of its own impossible standards. This is where the shadow begins, not in the pursuit of excellence, but in the silent belief that who they are is never quite enough. Mercury governs Virgo, but not the way it rules Gemini. In Gemini, Mercury dances curious light, quicksilver wit. In Virgo, Mercury sharpens. It becomes the scalpel, the instrument, the sacred editor of truth. It seeks precision, not performance, depth, not distraction. Virgo doesn't speak to impress, it speaks to clarify. It doesn't collect information for novelty, but for mastery. But mastery comes at a cost. When Mercury descends into the earth, into Virgo's realm, it becomes meticulous and often merciless. The Virgo mind is rarely still. It dissects, replays, reanalyzes. It questions every word it said, every decision made, every possible consequence of every action taken or not taken. And when this mental engine has no rest, it becomes a cage. Overthinking is not just a habit for Virgo. It is a form of survival, a way to stay one step ahead of chaos, a way to control what feels uncontrollable emotion, failure, rejection, uncertainty. So Virgo builds systems, internal rules, invisible rituals, everything in its place, everything accounted for, everything under control. But the irony is cruel. The more Virgo seeks control, the more anxious it becomes. Because life is messy, feelings are irrational, people are unpredictable, and Virgo, the sacred analyst, is constantly trying to organize a world that was never designed to be perfect. In this effort to maintain order, Virgo often forgets its body. It lives in the mind, scanning, solving, refining, while the heart waits quietly unseen. Emotions are sorted, labeled, intellectualized, but rarely felt. Virgo tells itself, "I'll rest when the list is done. I'll speak up when I'm sure it won't cause conflict. I'll ask for help once I've helped everyone else." But the list never ends. And so Virgo lives in a constant state of low-grade tension, a hum of guilt, worry, and unmet need. It doesn't explode, it contracts, it endures. And from the outside, no one notices. Because Virgo doesn't make a mess, it cleans it, even when it's breaking. There is a quiet pain in being the one who has it all together. Because when people believe you are composed, reliable, always thinking clearly, they forget to ask how you're doing. They assume you're fine, even when you're quietly unraveling behind the scenes. Virgo doesn't cry for help. It calculates how much its feelings will inconvenience others. It minimizes its own suffering so it can stay functional. But inside, Mercury is screaming, full of words, unspoken boundaries, uncrossed emotions, undigested. The shadow of Virgo's brilliance is self-erasure. A mind so powerful it can justify its own silence. A heart so disciplined it forgets how to ache out loud. And yet in that very ache lies the doorway to freedom. Virgo seeks purity, not just in action, but in essence. Beneath every refined gesture, every curated plan, every triple-checked decision lies a deep longing for internal and external alignment. A world that makes sense, a heart that feels safe, a life that reflects integrity. But the shadow hidden within this quest is the illusion that such purity is possible. The Virgo soul was not built for chaos. It flinches at disorder, not because it is weak, but because it remembers a time, perhaps, in spirit or myth, when things were whole, when life was harmonious and everything had its place. Virgo longs to return to that, not to control, but to restore. It is the sacred restorer of what has fallen apart, the keeper of the cosmic blueprint. But this longing becomes dangerous when it attaches to reality too tightly. Life by its nature is unpredictable. Love is messy. Creativity is chaotic. People are flawed. And Virgo, in its shadow, begins to believe that anything messy must be wrong, that anything flawed must be fixed, that anything uncertain must be feared. This is how Virgo builds its inner prison. The mind becomes a ruler. The heart becomes a critic. The soul becomes a worker trapped in an endless job. Perfect your body. Perfect your home. Perfect your emotions. Perfect your path. And if perfection never comes, keep trying. You're the problem. You didn't work hard enough. You didn't do it right. Virgo's relationship with control isn't about power. It's about protection. If everything is clean, if everything is labeled, if everything is predictable, then maybe nothing can hurt. Maybe the shame won't creep in. Maybe the rejection won't return. Maybe the inner judgment will finally fall silent. But it never does. The more Virgo polishes the surface, the louder the shadow becomes. The shadow says, "You'll never be enough. You missed something." If they knew how messy you really are inside, they'd leave. And so the loop continues. Another list, another cleanse, another apology for not getting it perfect the first time. This is the hidden agony of Virgo's order. It is born from a sacred place, but weaponized against the self. Because Virgo doesn't just want to appear good, it wants to be good. To embody goodness so fully that it can never be mistaken, never be abandoned, never be accused of failing the ones it serves. But true order does not come from control. It comes from acceptance, from learning that the most sacred spaces are not the cleanest but the most honest. That wholeness is not found in flawlessness, it is born in the willingness to let life be whole, even when it's unfinished. Virgo's task is not to purify the world into sterility. It is to learn how to stand in the middle of the mess and still find meaning, to let the desk be cluttered, to let the heart feel disorganized, to let the plan shift, and still know that they are worthy. They are whole. They are already enough. Because the truth Virgo must learn is this: the soul is not a spreadsheet, and love is never found in perfection. It is found in presence. Virgo is the sign of service, humble, thoughtful, devoted. It offers quietly, expecting little in return. It shows up where others fall away. It anticipates needs repairs. Damage translates chaos into clarity. But in its shadow, this sacred service becomes sacrifice, silent, invisible, and exhausting. What no one talks about is how often Virgo serves not from joy, but from survival. Somewhere deep within, Virgo learned that to be useful is to be lovable, that to help is to matter, that to be needed is safer than to be wanted. So it gives and gives and gives until there is nothing left. Virgo becomes the caregiver, the co-worker who takes on more than they should, the friend who remembers every detail but forgets their own birthday. They anticipate needs before they're spoken, solve problems before they're recognized. But inside there is a question that rarely leaves them: will anyone ever do this for me? Because service when born from love is holy, but when born from fear, it breeds resentment. Virgo may never say it aloud, but the bitterness grows quietly from the overlooked efforts, the underappreciated sacrifices, the constant giving that feels more like obligation than choice. They begin to feel like tools, not people, like functions, not souls. And yet Virgo rarely complains. Why? Because complaint would disrupt harmony, would make them look ungrateful, would draw attention they're not sure they're allowed to have. So they swallow their needs, numb their exhaustion, smile while fraying inside. This is the shadow of devotion, invisibility. To be known only for what you do, not for who you are. To be needed but not seen. To be useful but not held. And Virgo, the sacred helper, begins to question their worth. If they stop helping, will they still belong? Even love becomes transactional. If I support you, you'll stay. If I fix this, you'll love me. Virgo never intends to manipulate. But when love has always been earned through usefulness, conditionality becomes subconscious. They give hoping someone someday will finally see the soul behind the service. But the healing doesn't come from being appreciated more. It comes from knowing they are worthy even when they don't give. That their presence, their softness, their very being is enough. Like the healer in myth who forgets to heal themselves, Virgo's gift can only be fully awakened when turned inward, when they offer themselves the same compassion they extend to everyone else, when they stop editing their feelings and start expressing them, when they stop proving their value and start living it. Because Virgo's truest gift is not perfection, it is purity of heart. The sacred act of care, when it is free from shame, from guilt, from fear, becomes the most divine expression of love the zodiac can offer. But first, Virgo must ask the hardest question: can I receive what I so freely give? And when the answer becomes yes, the soul of Virgo begins to shine, not as the helper, not as the fixer, but as the whole human being they've always been. Virgo's archetype is often misunderstood, called the analyst, the servant, the perfectionist. But its true mythic mirror is the wounded healer, the one who knows suffering not as a stranger, but as a teacher, who holds wisdom forged in silence, in pain, in effort, who tends to others with the very medicine they have not yet dared to take themselves. The ancient myth of Chiron, the immortal centaur, wounded by a poisoned arrow, lives within Virgo's soul. Chiron could not heal his own wound, and yet became the greatest healer of all. He taught others the arts of medicine, music, and meaning. His wound did not stop his service. It became the source of his power. But the tragedy remained. While everyone else was made whole, he remained broken. This is Virgo's shadow. They know how to fix things. They know how to soothe, stabilize, restore. But when it comes to their own healing, they hesitate, they deflect, they dismiss. It's not that bad. Other people have it worse. I just need to get through this next task first. Virgo tends to others as a form of avoidance, because to slow down and face their own pain would mean stepping into messiness, the very thing they've tried to escape their whole life. And yet the pain remains. Virgo often carries deep unnamed grief. The grief of unexpressed emotion, the grief of being the strong one, the grief of never feeling quite good enough despite all the effort. And because this grief is so subtle, so internal, so well disguised, it often gets ignored, even by Virgo themselves. But there is a sacred intelligence in their suffering, a higher meaning behind their sensitivity. Virgo's pain, when acknowledged, becomes the key to its transformation. It turns self-criticism into discernment. It turns emotional paralysis into precise compassion. It turns guardedness into grace. Because Virgo doesn't just heal with logic, it heals with presence, with witnessing, with the soft, clean truth that emerges when someone finally feels safe enough to be seen, not fixed, not judged, but held. And Virgo has that power, but they must offer it to themselves first. This is where the dark side begins to dissolve, not through force, but through surrender. When Virgo stops resisting its own humanity, when it welcomes the imperfection, the chaos, the wound, not to dwell in it, but to listen, because that wound has something to say. It's not a flaw, it's a map. The Virgo who has faced their own shadow becomes luminous, not because they are whole in the way society defines it, but because they are whole in the way the soul remembers. They don't need to be perfect, they need to be real. And when they are, something shifts. Their service becomes sacred, their mind becomes soft, and their wound becomes their wisdom. In the end, Virgo is not here to erase the pain. They are here to transform it into light. Virgo's journey does not end in perfection. It ends in peace. Not the peace of a flawless plan or a spotless home, but the deeper, quieter peace that comes from accepting life as it is, beautifully unfinished, achingly human, and full of grace. This is the soul lesson Virgo must carry, that worth is not something earned. It is inherent. That purity is not in how clean or controlled things appear. It is in how honestly we live. The true alchemy of Virgo is not about fixing the world. It is about letting go of the illusion that the world or they themselves were ever broken. For all its precision, Virgo is still an earth sign. The body, the breath, the soil. These are Virgo's teachers, not spreadsheets or systems, but the sacred rhythm of nature. Nature is not perfect. It is cyclical. It withers and blooms. It decays and regenerates. And so does Virgo. The lesson is not to resist the mess, but to become fluent in its language, to find ritual in imperfection, to find devotion in the undone. In its highest form, Virgo becomes a priestess of the everyday, a guardian of what is sacred but unseen, the quiet kindness, the subtle beauty, the healing, found not in dramatic transformation, but in a single moment of presence. When Virgo releases the need to be flawless, it becomes free. Free to feel, free to rest, free to love without calculating if they've earned it. The Virgo shadow says, "You are not enough yet." But the Virgo soul, when awakened, says you are always enough, even in your becoming. And that is the secret no one talks about. That Virgo's darkness, the overthinking, the self-criticism, the impossible standards, all stem from a sacred desire to be good, to do right, to bring harmony. But goodness was never something they had to prove. It was something they had to remember. When Virgo finally softens the grip, when it welcomes the mess, the wound, the wildness, it doesn't lose its power, it gains it, because now it can serve not from scarcity, but from wholeness. It can speak without fear, create without control, love without caution. The healer becomes healed, the servant becomes sovereign, the critic becomes the quiet voice of compassion. And the world, so often shaped by loudness and chaos, is transformed not by fire, not by force, but by the still precise flame of a soul that has learned to be at home in its own imperfection. That is Virgo's true magic.